Hello everyone, welcome back. So let's just pick up from where we left off. So we want to start with integrating the login screen. So I think there is a little bit of adjustment we need to make. So the password toggle here seems to be off position. So let's quickly resolve that. So let's go back to the login screen. So actually this I open and close is just going to be one. So let's remove the other. So we are going to use put to change it later on. Okay, so let's just quickly adjust the position. So let's go to the input container and our style. So image top. So top should be 50%. So let's see. Alright, so that seems to be okay. Then I think one thing I used to do is I can now have transform, then translate y minus 50% as well, so that the size of the image is considered. But looks like the size of the image is more than I anticipated. Alright, so I get the idea. So the input field has a margin top, and as a result kinds of push the image container to the top. So let's try and undo that. So instead of the input field having a margin top, let's have the margin top on the image input control container. Then I think that should, so I think that makes things better. Alright, so let's start integrating. So let's quickly define the variables and things we are going to need. So back to the login.js. So we need to define our input. So we're going to need the use state. And that's all we need actually. Or rather the use effect as well. Use effect. And not effect, but context. Right. So later on we might need the use effect, but for now let's just get the ones we need. So let's define some variables. So the variable we need for the user login will be user data, or let's call it login data. Then set login. And by default it's going to be an object. So use state, an empty object. So we need the loading state as well. So const loading. So when we've clicked that button, we want to track the loading state. So set loading. So by default it's going to be false. So we need another boolean field. So that will be show password. Show password. So by default it's false. So what we can now have here is we can have the login data. So let's just call this data. So this is login data. Then we have so the submit button is also here. So we need to have the on submit here. So on submit function. So we've not defined that yet. So let's quickly define. So we are going to have access to an event later on. So we are already getting that here. And then we just have to pass this here. Then finally we need the show password. So we need both the show password and the set show password. Alright. So this set show password is a function, so take notes. So I think that's all we need for our auth form for now. So let's go back to the auth form and put in the necessary fields. So for the input, finally we need an onChange. So let's define an onChange function. So whenever we make changes to our input field, so we need the event as well. Alright, so let's put in the onChange. Alright, now to the auth form. So in order for us to maybe specify all that we need, we can just try to deconstruct it from here. So that way, whenever we want to make use of it on the register file, it literally prompts us what it's required. Or we can just leave it like this and copy, whichever we want. So now for the input, we need the value. So the value will be determined based on the name of the input field itself. So the name we want to give the username will be username. So that's the name of the input field. And as that, so with the name specified, what we can now specify for the field value will be props.data. We have access to data now. Then the name, which is username. Okay. So finally, we want to have the unchange. So unchange equals to props.unchange. Alright, so that works. Okay. So the next one is the input field and the password field. So same thing. So let's just copy the name, the value, and the unchange function. So this will be props.data.password. The name will be password. Then the unchange remains the same. Okay. So finally, for the image part, so let's define an onClick. So onClick will be, we want to set the show password to an opposite state. So props.set show password equals to not props.show password. So what this means in essence is if the current state of the show password is false, then it becomes true. So this is more like just a toggle. So it toggles the state. Then finally, we can have the source change based on the status of the show password. So currently, let's take a look at the I. So at this point, we want the show password. So the show password state is false. So that means we want the I open to be the option when the show password state is false. So what we can do now is we can say if not props.show password, then we want the I open to be the status, else we want the I close to be the status, to be the option. And also the type, let's update that. So let's change this to a brace. Then if not show password, then we have it as password, and else we want to have it as tests. Alright, so let's go back to this. So show password is not defined. Okay, it should be props, not just show password. Props.show password. Alright. So now if we click on this, we should have it switched like that. Okay, so it looks like we need to update the input field. So currently it's not having a padding. Let's quickly do that. So input field, padding. Okay, I think we have this here. So padding should just be 10 or true. Okay, all right. All right. So the first part of our content is okay. So we have the autofill. So if you want to remove autofill, you can just specify that by, although we are not going to remove, but you can do that by specifying autocomplete equals to new dash password. I really don't know why this works, but for some reason it works. Okay, it's not working. It's funny enough. Okay, well, maybe there is a new one or so, but at some point it does work, but it doesn't look like it's working now. Let me use off. Okay, let's just leave that, and by the way, we would have the autocomplete there so that we can just have our login credentials loaded. So we have successfully put in the necessary values. However, from the look of things, it looks like the input field is gaining extra size. Okay, so let's fix this by having box sizing, border box. All Alright, so that has been resolved. The extra size is gone. So also let's undo the position of what do we call it? The password toggler. So 10 pixel from the right. Alright, so that seems to be resolved now. Alright, so now let's undo the submit. Because as it is now, it looks like the info has already been filled. Also, let's have this as required field. So when you don't have them in place, it prompts you to fill in. Alright. So finally, the button is submit. And we can have the unsubmit on the form since that's how to undo that. So unsubmit. So we can just use props.unsubmit. Alright. So if we click on the button now, it will try to load because we've not undid the submission. So it's loaded with the fields we've filled in. And currently now, even though we have the fields in, it's not really updating the state. And that's because we've not undid the unchanged function. So currently, let's quickly undo the submit. So event.prevent default. Alright. Now if we console log the current login data, then we won't see anything. So let's open our console. So if we log in now, we only get an empty object. So let's quickly define our unchanged function. So it's actually very simple. All we need to do is we can say set login and login data, and this would be the existing data. So we spread in the existing data, login data, then we update based on the name. So e.target, so we can get the name from e.target.name equals to, so that's colon, e.target.value. Alright, that's all we need to do for the unchanged function. And if we go back to our console, so let's quickly pull up the console. If we log in now, we should get our data. So that's all we need. Alright, so we have access to our data now. So let's quickly define our URLs as well as start working with the URLs. So I'll create a new file for this. So new file, call this urls.js. And within our URLs, we want to define the base URL. So const base URL equals to. So our base URL will be https then api.dev.com, and obviously we need a slash because that will always extend it with other things. Alright, so now let's define the login URL. So const login. So since we are going to make use of this login URL elsewhere, so let's just export it. So export const login underscore URL. So we just extend the base URL. So base URL plus the login URL. So I think that is, I'm not really sure again. So let me quickly pull up the server to see that. Alright, so it's it's under the user and then login. So let's use that. So user/login. So that's our login URL. So we can go back to the login to actually use this. So I'll be using async await instead of the regular we used to. So to do this, I just put async here. Alright. So what I can now have here is I can define a status. So let or const result equals to await Axios. So we need Axios to perform our requests. We could use the fetch. However, I'm not very okay with that. So let's install Axios. So going back to our, so let's go back to our terminal to install this. So yarn hat Axios. Alright, so Axios is done installing, and before we use it, I have this helper function I have created in one of my projects that I make use of to do Axios related requests. So for this, I'll just create a new file. I'll call it helper file rather. And in there, we can just have other helper functions we want to make use of. So one of the helper function I will use is the Axios function I'm talking about. So let me quickly bring it up here. So here is it. So we have export const Axios handler. So that's what I named it. And with this, we have access to some of adjustments we can make to just make things easier. So let me import Axios here. So import Axios from right. Okay, let's import it as a capital letter. Alright, so let's quickly check through to see other things that we might need. So, well, maybe we don't need these two. So client ID, internal security. Yeah, I think we don't need those. So let's remove all this. So I was using it for a project like that, and I think it's just okay. So let's have it. Alright, so this is all we need, I think. And there is another method I want to also introduce. So I created a generic error handler that you can just tweak to work for you. So I'll just pull that in as well. Right, so here is what the error handler looks like. So you just check through your errors and pull up what you need. So I think this works for what I have. So as you can see, we get error response result data. So the structure of what I'm going to be getting works well with this. So based on whatever structure you are going to be getting from your backend, you might want to tweak your error handler to fit that. Alright, so basically that's all we'll be having. So since we've set up this, we can just make use of the Axios handler here. So Axios handler. So and that's pulled up. And within our Axios handler, we can specify the method. So the method is going to be post. So post, then the URL. So the URL is going to be the login URL. Then the token. So at this point, we don't have any token, so we don't need to specify that. Then the data. So the data will just be the login data. Alright. Now, since we are using Axios await, we want to just cache the error from here. So that way, if we are able to cache an error, that means result will be null. And if there is no issue, then we get content within our results. So let's cache. So cache E, that's the error. Then we want to use the error handler to undo this. So we can just console log the error handler. And all you have to put within the error handler is just your error, and it will undo the rest. So maybe later on we can now have a notifier that notifies us with the kind of error we have. So later on we'll do that. So but for now, let's just console log the error, and yeah, we can now check. So if results, so that's the only situation you are going to have this. So we can have if results, so that means there is no error, then you want to do whatever you want to do. And before we do this, let's set loading to be true. So yeah, we can just go back to put a loading status on our button. Then after all this, we want to set loading to be false. I actually think we'll do this first before any other check. Alright, so I actually think we are going to get an error because we don't have any account. Okay, loop object is not defined. So helper line 42. Line 42. Loop objects. All right, so there is another function that requires the error handler to work. So let's quickly get that as well. So it's just a function that loops through objects so that in case you have multiple data coming through, we can have access to it. All right, so I think we've resolved all errors and everything should be working now. So let's inspect and see how things unfolds. So if we log in now, let's see. All right, so invalid username or password, as we can see. Okay, so well, we got the error. What is next now is to actually render it so that we can see our errors. So to do this, I can just have an error field on the login page. So I'll just say error. So const error. Set error. So by default, error is null. Okay. So by default, the error is null. So what we can now do here is we can have. So let me take a look at the design again so that we can have a part where we can put the error in. So I will put this error above the auth form, or actually I think it should be within the auth form because the register component we want to use it. So let's have it within the auth form. So let's quickly create this within a div first. Actually, let's have an empty tag because that div is not really very useful. So let's see if everything's still well. I think so. Now we can have this as the error holder. So class name error holder. Okay. So that means we still have to pass error to the auth form. So let's do that as well. Error equals to error. Okay, I think that's just it. Okay. And we need the set error as well. So we can always remove the error if we want to. Set error. Alright, so now within our error holder, we want to just output the error. And remember, from what we can see in the console, the error kinds of have the HTML tag. So as a result, we need to we need to format the error so that we can show necessary HTML content. So to do that, we can just have a div. And we have the dangerously set in HTML. I think I've forgotten this thing. HTML equals to the props dot error. Okay, I hope this works. I've used this particular line of code for it's been a while. Alright, so we've done this now, and also we are going to have like a close, a cancel tag, a cancel image to just remove the error if necessary. And finally, what we can do here is we can say we want to show this if actually there is an error. So props.error, then and show this. Alright, so that's the plan. So let's get an icon for this. I don't think we are using any icon sets. Alright, we are not. So let's just go to our Figma and get an icon from there. So I think we can make use of Figma in that respect. So Figma. Alright, so here is our Figma, and what we want to do here is to just bring in the close icon if we don't have it somewhere already. Yeah, we have it here. We have it here, however, we need a color white. So let's change this to color white so that we can just use it. It's not an SVG but an image. So let's have this and export it. Alright, so we've exported it, and I'll just bring it down to our file. So we already actually have an existing close icon here. However, that color does not fit what we want. That one is a red color and we need a white color. So close white. Right, so that's it. Now we can come back to the login. Let's import the icon. So close white from assets, close dash white. Okay, so now in our auth form we can just have the close white there. So image and the source equals to close white. So I think what's best is actually having an icon library installed so that you can just reuse the icons rather than having to download different colors. Alright, so here is what we have. So for a quick test, let's have this as something. So let's have a div to actually make it look like an HTML content. So let's have a div and say invalid user name or password. Alright, so let's check it out. Alright, so this is what it looks like by default. So let's quickly style this so that we have it maintained. So error handler on our style. So dot error handler. So we want the background color to be red, and we want the content to be white. Alright, then we want it padded. So padding equals to 10 pixel. I think that's enough. Then display is relative. Not display, position actually. Alright, so with the position relative, we can now define position for our image. So image position is absolute. Then the top is, let's say, 5 pixel. The right is 5 pixel as well. And the width, let's say 16 pixel. So let's see how that forms. Alright. Okay, so the image seems to still be a bit bigger. So let's reduce it. So let's say 10 pixel for the width. Okay, that's better now. And let's change the cursor to a pointer so that it actually has the feel we want. Alright, so finally let's give it a margin bottom. So margin bottom of 20 pixel. Alright, so that looks okay. So by default, we don't have an error. So let's go back to the login and remove the error contents. Okay, So this is going to be null. So you can always put null or just have it empty. So by default, every time we submit, we want to set the error to be null like this. And every time we have an error, so instead of console logging it, we want to actually set the error. So set error to be this. All right. So finally, let's also have this. So on click. So we have the props dot set error equals to null. All right. So let's see this. Okay. So it's out. So if we try to log in now, we got the error. Okay. Error, invalid username or password. All right. So finally, I think before we actually move on to implementing the register, let's have our button actually load. Okay. So we have a loading component already. So what we can do is, while loading, so we sent in the loading status. Didn't we? Okay, we didn't. Okay, so let's do that. So loading equals to loading. All right, so while loading, we want to have it disabled and then the loading icon. So let's do that. So loading props.loading. Then you can just bring in a loading loader. So we define the loader not to have any size or stuff. So this should work quite okay. So loading. And yeah, disabled too. So disabled. So you can't click twice. So disabled equals to loading. Props.loading. Surely. Alright, so let's see this also. Let's see its work. So on click. Oh, okay. So we need to center our loading icon. So I think let's try the center tag and let's see if that works. Okay, that actually works. Alright, so I think that looks okay. So invalid username or password, and that's because we've not really created this user. So let's try create invalid username or password. So we don't have this user already. So what we can do is we can go and implement the register. Alright, so the register is having errors because we need to put in some information. So let's quickly do that. So for the register, let's copy nearly everything we have here because it's still going to work quite the same way. So we'll just change what needs to be changed. So let's go to the register and let's replace. Alright, so change this to register data. So what I usually do is to just have it as data so that I really don't need to rename. But I guess we can just have it for what we are doing here. So also we need the register URL. So let's go back to. So let's just look for every point where we have the register login data and replace. So the auth form here. So let's copy the auth form we have on the login. It's still quite the same thing. The only difference being this does not contain the login status. Right, so we are going to replace this with the register data. So this, then this. I think that's all we need to actually change. Okay. So we need access to the Axios handler. We currently don't have it here. It's now here. Error handler. Right. What again? So the login URL. So let's get the URL for the register. So Ctrl+C+V and register. So still the user, then register. Okay. So we can now replace this with register. So it doesn't seem to be seeing it. So let's just copy the login URL from here and we'll replace with register URL on the register parts. Right, and replace accordingly. Alright. So I think that's all we need to actually do here. If I'm right, I think that's actually all. Okay, set register data. Okay, we've now replaced that, so we still have set login data here. Alright, so I think that's all. Still okay. Use state is not defined, so let's have it. Use state. For some reason, I don't know why my Visual Studio Code is not giving me errors. I really don't know. Let me disable this. Alright, so sign up. So we are on sign up now. And so this is showing login. So let's just replace that so that we know we are registered. So that's on our auth form. So we only want to show login if props.login. So props.login, then we show login, else we show register. Right, so let's see if this works. Alright, so that looks okay. So now if we try to register, we probably would be successful. Let's see our request. So network. So what I'm thinking is when we register and we are successful, we want to have like, let's say, a prompt before actually redirecting to the login page, because we want to be redirected to the login page. So a prompt that says account created without actually disturbing anything. Okay, so let's create something. So for now, let's still work with alert. So we have the alert, and as soon as we click OK, it redirects us to the login screen. So later on, we have a better implementation for that. So register URL this. So if result is okay, if everything is okay, we want to. I'm curious. It looks like from our implementation, we actually return the token when we register instead of automatically logging. So let's quickly check to register. So let's have a username. So let's say Adefemi Wait. And I'll set a password. Yeah, so let me use that. So register. Alright, so everything seems to be successful. Okay, so that's the response we actually get. So user created is the response we got, and as such, we want to just alert that user created successfully. And when you click OK, it redirects you to the login screen, and you can just sign in. Or since we really don't need any other specialty, we can just automatically log in. I think that works too. Okay, let's actually have it like that. So immediately you create your account, it logs you in automatically, and later on you can just come back to login. So now if we go to sign in and we use the same username, so Adefemi Great, and the password is password, we should be able to sign in. Alright, so as you can see, we were able to sign in. We got our access token and stuff. And now, since we are going to be signing in automatically with the register, I think it makes sense to just abstract the signing in process. So let's abstract this, and yeah. So let's create a separate stuff. So const login request. So it's going to be an asynchronous operation. So async. So it's going to have the data and the URL. So well, I think the data is just what it needs. So the URL is still the same URL. So we have the data. All right. So we just return an await. So we just return this. So return await. So we await this. So we're actually not caching here, because for the case of register, we probably won't have any error, hopefully. But in the login, that's where we might have error. So we've abstracted this now, and what we can do now is we can await login requests, and we pass in the login data. Okay, I think we might actually want to do more. So actually, we want this to undo all the rest of the operation of it, loading the home page and things. So as a result, we might actually need to pass in more information. So we might need to pass in the set error handler here, okay, so that we actually cache the error and set it. So let's send in this one as well. So we sent it this as well, okay. So that means we actually are not returning anything from here. So what we are doing is we are trying to get the result from here. So const results from here equals to await this. Then we need this set error. We currently don't have it, so let's put it to set error, and this becomes the data instead of the login data. Now if result, so the if result we are supposed to have within our login, we can now have it here and do whatever process we need to do. And here we can just have the await login data, then the set error, then we just don't have this. So this is all we have here. So we've abstracted all we need here. So now back to the register. So if result, if the registration was successful, then we can just come here and say we really don't need to await the login request in this scenario. We can just say login, because there's nothing else we are doing. So login requests. So since we are using it here, we need to export it. Export. Alright, so login requests. So let's import that from login. Right. So login request, then we send in the login, the register data is still the same data. Then the set error. Okay. So for the login, we had to wait, because based on this situation, we are still setting loading false. Okay. But in the case of the register, we already set loading false before actually logging in. Okay. All right. So I actually think we might want to have everything down. So let's await this. And under here, we can set loading false. All right. So hopefully, if there's no error, we can always have it like this. Alright, so down in our results, let's print results. So console log results. So let's try and log in with that existing user. And let's access the console log here. So hopefully there shouldn't be any error. Alright, so we got what we need. So the result.data. So actually it's result.data. Okay, so let's try again. So the reason why we are very sure of our endpoint is because we wrote test. So that's the benefit of test once again. Just like to reiterate. So we have the access and the refresh token. So let's try and create another account and see that we automatically log in. So if we try to use this account now, let's see what happens. Okay, so we didn't undo the error here well. So this is like a direct error from the backend. So we could just undo this and do something better. But what this is saying is that a user with this username already exists. So we can close this and we register. So let's register with Adefemi1. So let's ensure that. So as you can see, we automatically logged in. All right. So let's save this token, and yeah, I think in the next episode we can now start implementing the authentication component. So all we need to do now is to say, okay, so in our auth controller, we define a token name the other time. Let's export it so that we can use it there. So back to the login. So we can just have, what do we call it? So back to the login, we can just have the local storage dot set item. So we want to set the token name if we have access to it here. Then JSON dot stringify. So it has to be a string. The results dot data. So the result dot data contains the access token as well as the what do we call it? The refresh token. So this is the token name, which we currently have not imported. So let's try and import it. So import token name from. So that is the auth controller. Yeah. So I think that should work. So, and after we are done with that, we can then reload to the home page. So we have two ways of doing this. We can either just do a add reload, or we can send in props to this place as well. So I'll go with the last. So let's send in props here, and we can actually load. So props dot history dot push. Okay, so we are pushing to the home page. So that means we need to send props. So you can either just send the history if you want to, because as it is, we are still accessing the history. But I think the props is okay. So props. Alright, so that's all we need to do. So if we go back to sign in now, and we sign in, if we log in, so it takes us here, and as you can see, it's still loading. So we still need it to be loading until we confirm that the token we have is actually still active and we have a user attached to it. Alright guys, we're going to stop here today, and in the next episode we are going to implement the auth and also start integrating with our chat sockets. So see you in the next episode, and bye.